You know, for a long time now, I've been slowly getting myself to this point where everything I've been researching seems to completely coincide. Now, some of you will have heard me before say that in this game there is no real specialisation. There's no need to specialise because then you get too narrow a view. You're basically, your one subject and one subject alone should be truth. So everything melds together. And this is becoming more and more, even bigger of a reality, I should say. Just researching this series. See in the background now, you should be seeing some of the lovely sites that are around Russia. All the ancient sites, Neolithic sites, that a lot of them defy explanation. I've been saying for a while that these are a very ancient lost civilization that a lot of people have missed, and it is. Russia is where the legends of the Hypoboria come from, yeah? The Hypoborians, which were always said to come from the frozen north. And where I found some of the most amazing structures, a few of which with the help of my very good friend and my number 2 on Fisher Data Drops, Thumper, we've managed to find some extraordinary sites. You see, this thing's becoming more and more clear, especially when you start looking at the legends and the folk tales and the mythologies within Russia. Because like Georgia and like the UK, Russia's patron saint is St. George. Now you can see on the coat of arms here, killing the dragon. That's a depiction of St. George, which is centuries old. In fact, you should be seeing the picture of that as well, the picture that it's from. But they also have Arthurian legends that run along the same theme. Legends that match the Duke of Lancaster. Folk tales that match Jack the Giant Killer. And it's starting to become more and more apparent that this is where they started, where everything began, Hypoboria to Doggerland to Errata. Because the same legends, the same mythologies, and the same folk tales all follow on from each other. But the whole region of Russia is where they started.
Erebus became synonymous with the underworld, even becoming a byword for it, as can be seen in Hesiod's Theogony. Zeus struck him, the Titan Menetius, with a lurid thunderbolt and sent him down to Erebus. And in the Homeric hymns, Hermes came, bidding me Persephone come back from Erebus, and many other works. Similarly, Hades' name was also used as an appellation for the underworld. However, there were differences between the two. Erebus more so pertained to the dark and shadow of the underworld, while Hades invariably pertained to the totality of the underworld itself. Here's a passage from Edith Hamilton's book, Mythology A to Z, that elaborates on this. As the darkness under the earth, he was sometimes called Erebus, the personification of darkness and shadow, and sometimes the chasm or pit that separated the world of the living from the underworld. He was a god, but he had no cult, no following. He was simply there, the personification of something that is always there, a part of the underworld and of the world above it, like the atmosphere around the earth. Though Erebus' name was used on occasion, Hades' name was the true name of the underworld, and because of this, Hades' name would transcend Greek mythology and find its way into Jewish and Christian scripture. The Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, is the holy text from which the Old Testament is derived. It was originally written in Hebrew, of course, but the first language it was translated to was ancient Greek in the 3rd century BC. The ancient Greek rendering was later called the Septuagint, a name derived from the Latin word Septuaginta, meaning 70, reflecting, as the story goes, the 72 Jewish scholars, 6 from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, who worked on the translation. The Hebrew word for the underworld is Sheol, and when the Hebrew Bible was translated to ancient Greek, instances in which the word Sheol was used were typically changed to Hades. We are now going to spend the rest of the video looking at Erebus' family tree, because beyond this, Greek mythology has almost nothing to say about him. First there was Chaos, the great void. Then came Gaia, the personification of the earth, Tartarus, the great chasm that existed beneath the earth, and Eros, the personification of love, desire, and attraction. Basically the procreative power that permeated the universe. Following the emergence of these 4 primordials, Chaos independently produced 2 children, Erebus, the personification of darkness, and Nyx, the personification of night, making them the first 2 beings to be brought into existence through reproduction, unconventional though it was. Erebus and Nyx coupled, as was often the perverse wont of brother-sister pairs in Greek mythology, and together they produced Ether and Hemera. Ether was the god of the bright upper atmosphere, and Hemera was the goddess of the day. Following in the incestuous footsteps of their parents, Ether and Hemera came together and produced Thassala, a sea goddess. She was associated with the life-giving quality of the sea, sometimes said to personify its calm and gentle waters, as opposed to its rough and stormy aspects, which were more so associated with Pontus, the primordial deity who personified the sea in its totality. Sometimes these 2 were portrayed as a couple. Also born to Erebus and Nyx was Charon, the ferryman who transported the souls of the dead across the river Styx. He is often depicted as a grim and silent figure, with a long beard and tattered robes, who uses a long pole to steer his boat across the river. Charon would only ferry the souls of those who had received a proper burial, and had coins or other offerings to pay for their passage. If a soul did not have the necessary payment, they would be forced to wander the shores of the river Styx for 100 years before they were allowed to.
Hello there. Yeah, it's been a long while since I've done one of these videos, isn't it? There's quite a few things that got in the way. I felt at the time were probably more pressing, shall we say. But I also wanted to ensure what was detailed in this final part will be not only easily understood, not only tie up most of what I've been covering in just these Hypoboria episodes themselves, but also tie up everything else. And some of you that were possibly very likely been confused, not just by these videos, but cryptic things I've said in the past and other videos that I've done and also some of my posts on Telegram. Some people are rightly very baffled, so hopefully this will help clear some of them. In order to do that, we need to start at the beginning. Like I said, this is where it all began. Where it all began. At least this part of human history, or what we're experiencing today in our human history, began very likely hundreds of thousands of years ago in the northern regions of Russia. Mostly in the area between the Ural Mountains and the Kola Peninsula. And I know I've covered it before, but this comes from the discoveries that were made there, or that have been made there, some of them only in the last 10 to 20 years. Are probably the oldest of what I've called, or what I've termed the Hypoboria civilization, that spawned the legends of the Northmen that the Vikings were so, or the Norse rather, were so terrified of, that also bore the legends of the Fomorians as well, from the activities and the effects that those activities that they were doing in Hypoborean started there had on them when they moved over to Doggerland and had to escape Doggerland also. And they continued all the way across Europe, down into the Black Sea, continued into the Black Sea when Narata was there, and then subsequently spread back out again when Narata fell and was flooded deliberately. We know that the technology that enabled that flooding is in the Caucasus Mountains. There was that gravity pump, what I believe is a gravity pump found at Korahara in Kabardino-Balkaria, on the border between Kabardino-Balkaria and Georgia. I believe that's probably one of many. There's probably, I think if someone LiDAR'd that whole mountain range, they'd find similar sort of constructions within those mountains. I truly believe there are several. And we know that the legends, the Georgian myths about St. George, and also their flood myths, also mirror what is actually in there and actually go into how it was built by a group of people that came across the Black Sea with a weapon of huge importance that they wanted to hide using the mountain, and they took down the mountain, built this structure, and then built the mountain back up around it. Prometheus, the legend of Prometheus, when after giving us fire or enlightenment or technology, depending on which way you want to look at it, Zeus tied him to Mount Erebus being the highest mountain in the Caucasus Mountains. We get the legends of Medea that collects in his blood below to turn into an elixir of immortality, mixing it with the mountain oak, an ancient mountain oak, the sap of that. These are only found in certain areas around the Black Sea area and some areas of Britain, a couple of areas here and there in Europe, the Germanic regions, Scandinavia, but also further north, in the Urals and near the Kola. Everything begins to tie together very strongly around these certain, not just folk tales, but legends of our past gods that our ancestors had, and the gods of the myths of those gods, not just the Romanian ones that are very similar to what we have, and Georgian, and everywhere in that Black Sea region, typically they all have eerie connotations with our Arthurian and St George myths, as do the Russians. The Russians have the same ones, especially in that colder Ural mountain area, but also spread out into Siberia, down towards the Mongolian desert. Likewise with the Greeks. The Greeks also have similar sort of myths, and told in a slightly different way, but we're all tied together by that one saint, St George. Why is that? Well, this is because these are the areas where the people that left Hypoboria went to after a cataclysm, the first cataclysm that they very likely could have created themselves. They moved to Doggerland, which is now the English Channel. They moved to there, and then they moved, when the English Channel began to fill up, they spread out across over into Ireland, which gave birth to the mad gods, which were the Fomorians. They also spread out into Europe, back into Europe and down towards towards the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. Wherever they settled, they seemed to carry on the same sort of legends, the same sort of myths, told in very similar ways, just with slight name changes. They also, this is something else which is also very strange, they also have a very sort of deep and steeped paranormal-like energy in the areas where they did eventually settle down. That area of northern Russia, the Urals and Kola regions, are very sort of stark, energetically, very dark in a way. The people around those areas are very sort of mystical, or the mystical sort of legends and folklore and mythologies that all stem in that area all flow out and are mirrored in the UK as well, which is another strong point, which is again steeply sort of submerged in this sort of paranormal, mystical, magical sort of energetic flow within the mythologies and the folklore. Likewise, the areas of the Black Sea, you get in Romania, you get the vampire legends, the werewolf legends, you get all the very strange sort of behaviours of the rulers in that area, one of which being Vlad the Impaler. Everyone knows about Vlad the Impaler, obviously, Vlad III, Vlad Tepes, and his goings on. But you also get Elizabeth Bathory from Romania. You get King Samuel from Bulgaria, who supposedly had a vast treasure vault hidden somewhere in Bulgaria. You get the location of the Eurasian capital city called Tripalia. You know, that was there now. There's the pyramids that are in Crimea. There is so much just in that one area alone. It's what people are interested to begin with. Which tracked me back to Doggerland and back up to, like I said, the Ural Mountains. In the Ural Mountains, we have that discovery of the 12-foot wooden statue or effigy of what is believed to be the first depiction of evil. Not just by the way it looks, but by the feeling it gets off it, but by the artifacts that were found near it, the sacrifices, the strange sort of legends that are around the area where it was found. You get Vatavara not so far away. Where that statue was found is in the middle of a rectangle of Mampupuna, which is called the Seven Brothers, which are 7 huge stone sort of pillar-like structures that are in the middle of absolutely nowhere. No one's entirely sure what caused their creation. Of course, there's there's local folklore of 7 sorcerer brothers that were a bit too big for the boots and were turned into those 7 pillars as a punishment to live out eternity, unable to move, and set in stone. Which links back to Medusa. Oh, okay, we'll see where this is going. These then you get to the west of that, directly west, in an absolutely straight line, which you probably saw at the beginning, but I'll put it up again here. As you can see there's a straight line that runs from Mampupunur to Vosavara. Vosavara is a very strange area that was heavily contested during World War II between Finland and the Nazis and the Soviets. And it's full of dolmens all over the place. It's also full of petroglyphs everywhere, bizarre, huge artworks, carved into the stone, into the sides of the cliffs, and the various sorts of massive boulders and rock faces and all sorts all over that entire mountain, that has its own very sort of strange folklore, and even up to World War II, where people were being killed by some mysterious thing that the Russians witnessed the Finns witnessed from across the battle lines, looking at the mountain. They could see this huge battle that the Soviet soldiers that took over the mountain were having with something. Absolutely tore them to shreds. Scared the living daylights out of them. So the Finns naturally gladly gave it to the Russians. Anyway, directly north from Vosavara, from that area, you will see the Kola Pyramids, the Kola Peninsula. Now that area, there's 2 pyramids that are in that area, along with various ruins all over the place, sundials, moondials, rock swirls, you name it, all over there. It was also it's also the area of the largest hole ever drilled, the Kola Deep borehole. It's got to 7 miles down. Very strange sort of area there as well. And it had a massive Soviet base there that was one of Russia's versions of Area 51. That is supposedly decommissioned, but it's still very active and still heavily guarded. And then directly east from that, and directly south from Mampupunur, is the Ural pyramid that I saw you, that Thumper found, that I showed you a couple of episodes ago, that's pictured here. That's a bizarre sort of out of place thing. If ever I've seen one. In fact, the surrounding area, there's nothing else like it all over that area, which is even weirder. There's lots of sort of ice lakes that are formed naturally, obviously. All them are, but there's others there that are very sort of strangely located. It's all around that area. It's believed that area may have, at one time, hundreds of thousands of years ago, may have been the geographic North Pole at some point for the 23.3 degree shift in the Earth's axis. After a cataclysm again. It was also under the star Vega. It still is. Even more bizarre.
god of Ahura Mazda is often labeled as the god of light in Zoroastrianism. But that's not accurate. He was never a god in a mythological sense. He was conscious law, the intelligence behind order. The name Ahura means Lord, but Mazda comes from Mazda, meaning wisdom, memory, mind. Not memory as in the past, but cosmic memory, a kind of original blueprint that encoded balance into the fabric of existence. His adversary Angramanyu or Ahriman wasn't just evil, he was the distortion of perception, an intelligence that bends awareness, breaks coherence, and pulls beings into fragmentation. This was good versus evil. This was alignment versus entropy. Ahura Mazda wasn't fighting a monster, he was folding the grid. In the deeper layers of the Avesta texts, Ahura Mazda creates through vibration, through the word, not a voice, but an activation key. That's not mythology, that's technology described in ancient language. And Zoroastrians believed that humans had the power to tip the scale, not through belief, but through thought, speech, and action that aligned with the original pattern.
Right. Now, I know this is a bit jarring, but this is a common hazard of never writing a script for what I detail in the video. I do everything from memory, as many of you will know. You've watched me for a while. So yes, it may be jarring, but most of you are probably used to it by now. Right when I was editing, like I said, I forgot completely to mention, or to go into why the Denisovans and the Neanderthals were part of all of this. What we've discovered, as you'll have probably, if you'll watch my previous episodes, you'll know this already, that it's been discovered that essentially Caucasian people have been around for a heck of a lot longer, and especially in Europe, than academics actually first thought. And it's completely thrown the whole concept of out of Africa out the window. It's now dead. Because of genetic evidence, we now know that sub-Saharan and Western Africans never left those regions. They never got as far up past the Sahara. They just stopped at that sort of central and southern and western Africa sort of area, really. Western Africans are as genetically different to sub-Saharan Africans as we are to either of them. And this threw up some major developments. Things are actually advancing pretty quickly now because of this new information. Turns out Northern Europeans are in most part Neanderthal. We have far more Neanderthal DNA than any other people on the planet. Caucasians are a bit of a mix between Neanderthal and Denisovan. We get all the complexion and probably the hair colour from the Denisovans and our eye colour, and we also get the aspects of Neanderthal, the denser bone structure, we're more built for a winter environment, a cooler environment, as opposed to the African peoples, black Africans and southern Africans that are built for that kind of sort of weather, and the hunting styles that they have running across plains and everything else. Even so, we also appear to have lived amongst each other all at the same time. Neanderthal, Denisovan, and what would become Caucasians. And we've discovered this due to skeletons that have been found in Spain, with 600,000-year-old skeletons. That's the oldest that they found. That's a Neanderthal skeleton. They found Denisovan skeletons in Spain, in the Basque region of Spain. This was found in 2017. They found Caucasians that look like us, modern Caucasians, all in this cave, all buried in this one cave, which means that we intermingled with each other. We've also found similar in Greece, in Israel as well, Britain off the coast of Cornwall, all over, and especially in the Denisova region of Russia. I suppose the best explanation of what we could consider our sort of ancestral memory of encountering, of being in sort of contact with the Denisovans, probably comes from Norse mythology. The frost giants of the Norse mythology that were always fighting against the Asgardians were the Denisovans. The Denisovans were far taller than we are, far more bigger built, yeah? But they were blonde-haired, blue-green eyes, yeah? And they lived in the far north, yeah? They came from that far north area in the region of that sort of Hypoboria area. Our ancestors, white Caucasian ancestors, were also a lot taller during the time when they left Hypoboria and migrated across northern Europe and down into Doggerland. They are the basis for the legends of the Fomorians in Ireland, the mad gods, right? This is something else we need to get a grip of. Orcs, trolls, stuff like that trolls mainly from a folklore and things. We got that idea, that is an ancestral memory of Neanderthal, the proper Neanderthal, brutish, powerful, dangerous, very dangerous. There's a theory that not only did we, as in modern humans, have battles against the Neanderthals, they also hunted us. And they were far more efficient predator, yeah? The Neanderthals that were left, and eventually they got bred out. Same with the Denisovans, they too got bred out eventually. A lot of them ended up migrating to the east, and this is where we also get the people of the Indian subcontinent, some of the Middle Eastern races, particularly the peoples of the Stand, the Afghanis and the Cossacks are the only surviving highest genetic match to the Eratans that disappeared when the Black Sea filled. Yeah? The Afghanis are, unlike all the rest of the Asiatic steppe people, they have blue and green eyes. Yeah? The same coloured skin as someone in Pakistan or in India, but they have blue or green eyes. The Denisovans also gave birth to the Chinese and the Polynesians, and then they spread out into the Americas. As you go further east through the genetics, you find more and more Denisovan DNA being present, especially in the Polynesians and in the Native Americans, coincidentally, and also the Aborigines of Australia, and also the Maori as well of New Zealand. We have significantly less. We have more Neanderthal DNA than we do Denisovan DNA. But we also have what is known as a ghost species, which interacted with us very early in human evolution, in our human evolution tree, which is a different one from what the Africans have. Yeah, it's very strange. And then eventually we did sort of begin to intermingle a lot more, especially during the time of the Egyptians. You get all just more and more sort of African peoples come together in a more sort of homogeneous kind of way, even though the Egyptians were olive-skinned, and people hate this fact, but it's just a fact. It is absolute categorical fact. The Egyptians are more in common with the European Mediterranean sort of people than they did anywhere else on the African continent. Same with the Moroccans. Morocco wasn't always populated by black people. You look at traditional Moroccans and they were Aryan, just like the Iranians, also Aryan, white people. Yeah. But again, came across that Caucasus region through Azerbaijan and Armenia and up across into the Black Sea. Again, this has been a kind of pilgrimage. It seems to be an area that we gravitate around quite a lot. And I've already explained why that is in previous videos. So yeah, the Denisovans is where we get our technology. Yeah, where white people get their technological ingenuity. Yeah, you can see this through their artifacts that they found. They obviously are metallurgy just by the drill holes in some of the stone bracelets that they found, and other sort of general bits and bats. But they're also very heavily populated around that Hypoboria area. How advanced is? It's open to debate. You can speculate. I truly believe, from what I can gather just from the folklore and mythological records, that humanity has been far more technologically advanced than we are today, leaps and bounds. Joseph B. Farrell is someone that, if you've never read any of his stuff, you should have a look. He goes into interstellar wars between ancient races of humans. There's certain, how can I put it? Certain key details that can be easily missed within not just religious texts, but ancient, anything mythological, and again folkloric texts that really point to technology in use, very high, advanced technology that we have since attributed to magic, even though there was still that element, there's still that energetic manipulation element, to a great deal of what we were doing back in those days. We still had a very high degree of technology because of this magical element, This is something that's been beaten out of us. Our intuition, our ability to manipulate reality in a way that many of the Indian traditions, not just on the Indian subcontinent, but the Native American traditions, even the Aboriginal African tribes, they share the same sort of traditions, magical traditions. We still have them kind of in the UK with the Druids, but it's more for show, just for rich leftists to act like cool. And that intuitive side we get from the Neanderthal parts of us, Our Neanderthal parts, plus, like I said, our ability, our inherited ability to survive in conditions like freezing cold temperatures and still thrive when it's not being suppressed by particular forces that would rather we were dependent on them rather than on ourselves. It's also why, and people don't like me saying this either, but it's also why white people get a lot bigger in bulk muscle mass than black people do. And many of you are going, fuck off, do they fuck? Oh yes they do, oh yes they do. You look at any American wrestler, right? Yeah, okay, they use steroids, but they still need to have the genetics to actually be able to put on that bulk, that muscle mass. And yes, there are some black people that get close to how big they are, but they don't. The man with the biggest arms in the world, 28-inch around biceps, You look at the world's strongest man, Whenever they run and they have black people entering those all the time, it's always, I'd say pretty much 99.9% of the time, always a white guy that wins it. And usually one of the Scandinavians, which is infuriating. So that's where we get that from. That's where we have that trait, and also, like I said, we have the Denisovan trait of their intelligence, their ingenuity, their blonde hair, their blue eyes, their light complexion. All the things that are also attributed to the Anunnaki. And again, this is why I say that they were human. They weren't aliens, they never were. What was residing inside them was alien. And I've already explained that in another video. Anyway, back to the rest of the main one. So all that area was populated for sort of longer. In a very far distant past, yeah. We've had so many skeletons, so many different skeletons of various sort of hominid races, Denisovans, Neanderthal, even modern humans, that are all like hundreds of thousands of years old, between 250 and 450,000 years old, that are just in that area alone. Which is why I believe that was the original site of Hypoboria. Europeans, as we like to call ourselves, the more Scandinavian sort of variant of European began before we moved south, like I said, after a cataclysm, and this was due to what I firmly believe is where the first religions began, through our contact with plasma entities, or some sort of plasma entity, a sentient plasma entity that is very likely circling us as we speak in the form of the Korluska-Galact. And if you don't know what that is, watch me last episodes on the old gods. These were basically a positive influence on us, but I think a little too positive and a little too benevolent, and we craved to have them back. And this created this craving sort of created an opportunity within us to develop certain energetically manipulating sort of techniques, or as we will call magical techniques. We began to develop sigils, chants, spells, all in our desperation to summon these beings back, because we missed them. I don't know the reasons why we would want them back, but it's clear that we did. The Navajo have a few sort of creation legends of the Dene people, which were their sort of ancestral gods, if you will. And they talk of certain words and phrases that we were first given by these creation gods that enabled us to create things around us and do what we wanted, but we abused them as we would naturally. And they were slowly taken away from us. And this is similar in scope to some of the creation legends in that sort of in that area, the ancient folklore in that area, and also coincidentally in the Black Sea area, and also in British and Irish folklore, as well as Germanic, Scandinavian and Greek. That there were certain abilities that we were given when we first came in contact with these beings, shall we say, and then they were gradually taken away from us and we were made to forget. These same techniques we again misused, again probably the perfectly sort of not altruistic, but innocent kind of way to try and get to see these same plasma entities again, and we essentially invited something else in. Now, this is where you start getting the influence of what I call it the One Cult, because that's what it essentially was in the Ural Mountains at that time. That's what that giant statue is. It's a depiction of this being, and the same sort of similar kind of depiction in stone in the stone statue of the same sort of being that was found in Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. It's a very sort of tall, bright white statue of what looks like a man, but piercing sort of black onyx eyes set in. It's the same sort of depiction, the same sort of thing you find in ancient Celtic legends, tied to darkness itself. Same with Erebus in Greek mythology, in Orphic Greek mythology, or Orthodox. Erebus was the god of darkness, and where what the underworld is comprised of. Darkness is an entity in and of itself, and this again opens up the ancient beliefs that demonic magic, as they called it, which is a form of very, very dark sort of chaos, black magic, was an entity in and of itself, and this is what forms the doorways, the portals that we open to conjure these beings through. That energy is sentient, and it integrates our darker base sort of instincts and feelings and actions into itself, and develops itself over time to become a far more sentient, far more powerful being that the Zoroastrians called Ahriman. This all started at Hypoboria. We brought it in through these rituals. It slightly fooled us into thinking that it was on our side, it was helping. But it wasn't, it was doing something very specific. It started getting us to do pretty horrendous things, not just to each other, but to the wider world. Rituals and practices that were then emulated across the globe. Some of them we find in the sacrifices of the bog sacrifices in the UK, where they would slit someone's throat or bash them over the back of the head and kick them into a marsh to kill them. That's like the nice sort of things. Then you get the Dianic cults, the Hecate cults of ancient Greece. This is before the classical sort of Greek period, where women sort of, we had a matriarchy. Yeah, people keep turning around and calling the patriarchy that we're supposed to live under today as being murderous and bloody and quite evil, and we need a matriarchy. No, we fucking don't. This isn't misogynistic to say. There's a reason why the fallen angels came down and went to the women, because energetically they could come up with the energies and practices and magic needed to do what these fallen wanted. And they did horrendous things. There's the Artemis, the ritual of the spring bull that was for Artemis that they did every year, and the women would get up at dawn. Everyone would lock themselves into the houses, and the female priestesses would get up at dawn, let out a calf, and let it run through the town, and they would chase after it to catch it, and once they caught it, they'd rip it to pieces. All of them just dive on it, kill it, and rip it to pieces, and eat the meat raw and drink its blood. You get the ancient rites of kinship that were not only in these sort of very, very distant ancient Greek sort of cults, but also the same in some of our pre-Druidic sort of days in the UK, and they were continued in Egypt as well for a good while, where the male that would be king would be sequestered away for 20 years as he grew up and grew older, and then he would become king, and 4 years later the queen would either herself or one of her sisters or a first cousin in the royal family, would then sleep with the king on that last night in a ritualistic practice. Taking his virginity basically, because he had to be pure all the way through. And then at the end of the practice they would chop his knackers off and leave him to bleed out. And then the whole process would start again, and this was a ritual of kingship. We had a pretty poor deal for a long while. There was more war, chaos and destruction during ancient times and under that matriarchy than people realise. In fact, if anything, one side or the other, male or female, both are completely destructive on their own. You need a balance, synergetic balance of both. Same with black and white people, you need a synergetic balance of black and white people together, working together, not necessarily breeding together, but working together. And I don't mean that to be racist, it's just we have very different sorts of evolutionary paths that I've explained before, very different traits, but both need to be respected and used. And at the moment, as is the case, we don't have that. And this is down to Ahriman once again, because after going through all these crazy sort of folkloric tales all over the place, all over Slavic Europe, like the Slavic regions of Europe, and Turkey and Russia and everywhere else, I started to find more areas in Russia, like Ahriman, which is like Stonehenge, only bigger in the middle of absolutely nowhere, in the middle of the Russian tundra. Pobazhin, Khakazia, which are in the eastern side of Russia, which is one of the areas where they moved to again, following ley lines and energetic lines, and they built thousands of sites going along the way. All of it set up a grid. You can follow these lines especially from, it's just incredible, from Ahriman to Stonehenge is a straight line. Yeah, it even has the curvature of the earth in there. It's just incredible. From Stonehenge and Ahriman downwards, they stop at a point at Baalbek, which is even more insane. And then from Baalbek you work your way down into the Riyadh desert to a site whose name I've completely forgotten, and it spreads out again into two sites, one in Sudan and another one further into the Riyadh, into Oman. All areas, not Oman, sorry, into Yemen. All areas, by the way, which are pretty contested, shall we say. Yeah? Right in the middle of all that, in the central part, is Crimea. Yeah, Crimean Peninsula, and straight up is Votavara, Kola, Ural Mountains, Montpellier, and across to Votavara again, or down, depending on which way you want to be. Down into that central part, which is Crimea. Chernobyl and Crimea a bit further down. They were showing us something that was just completely shocking, it was stunning, it really was. All of them lined up, you'll see here, make a pattern. That pattern I believe in saying this, that pattern is the constellation of the Phoenix. It's a message for us. See, what Ahriman did when he came to visit our ancestors was set in motion a series of events that would result in the creation of himself. Sounds crazy. Yeah. But when you think of what Ahriman is, he's a being that exists outside of space and time. He can therefore see when the perfect time is to insert himself and ensure that his existence will be created. Yeah? But at the same time, this puts us in a paradoxical sort of time paradox, if you will. Which is why a lot of people feel very sort of uneasy and strange around about now. Why we're seeing the red and blue Kachina turning up, because this happens every time. Every time that cycle ends, which is what the Hopi Indians talk about over and over and over again. The blue and red Kachinas turn up. The world ends, we start at the beginning, and we repeat. Each of us advancing further and further towards a point where eventually one of us will tip the other over the edge, and we'll either come to a world of chaos or a world of light, basically. The Hopi told us about this, warned us about this, and they knew all about this, as did all of our sort of ancient cultures, but we don't in the Western world because we ignore it. We consider it as myth, consider it as the ravings of crazy people and drugs in like the ancient world, you know, stuff like that. Oh, stuff. That's not it. That's not it. There's always a warning. See, Ahriman is a creation of our own. We created him through our own misdeeds, our own sin, if you will, our own anger, hatred, ill feeling towards one another. All those energies coalesce into that sort of demonic magic, as they called it, to create that being, which is Ahriman, our punishment. That's what it is. It's also our obstacle we must overcome to evolve. He's our ultimate nemesis. He knows everything about us. Can get any sort of information from anywhere about us. What do we have these days that sounds like that? What are we creating? My belief, alright? I'm not saying this is fact. I'm just saying this is what I've concluded. This race towards sentient AI will result in someone, if we haven't already, if we haven't done already, but someone hooking up that AI to quantum computers that already sort of break into sort of different dimensions anyway, to get the results that we're looking for. The code that we use to write AI, to create AI, that code that we write, no one really knows entirely what it does. No one knows how it works. We don't even know how AI works. We just have a vague idea, and it does things that surprises us all the time. AI, sentient AI, is Ahriman. Once we create him, he will use us to travel back to begin the process to create himself again. It sounds crazy, but this is also how it's described in Zoroaster, isn't it? He's a judge. Like I always say, everything that we research, that we look into, from the occult to politics, to power structure, to ancient history, to religion, to science, to everything, it all ties together. And it all began at Hypoboria.
The very first god, including primordials, titans, and Olympians, in all of Greek mythology. This, in a broader sense, is indicative of how complex Greek mythology was. There having been, the accounts that remain popular today notwithstanding, different versions of the creation myth, something evidenced by a multitude of allusions to Oceanus as a creator across an array of works, and by offshoots of what could be called Orthodox Greek mythology, such as Orphism, a religious movement that centered on the hero Orpheus, who was thought of as the seed from which Orphism grew, him having brought back secret knowledge when he returned from the underworld to the land of the living. Oceanus was the personification of the great river that encircled the world, and in the context of his family, the other 11 first-generation Titans, he was somewhat of an aberration, partial to pacifism as he was. He eschewed conflict, neither joining in the castration of his father, nor fighting in the Titanomachy, the 10-year war between the Olympians and the Titans. I was going to say, though he was undoubtedly one of the most powerful gods in Greek mythology, he seldom surfaces in any of its myths, more often existing as a piece of the stage on which Greek mythology unfolds than as an actor in the production. But after delving into his mythology more deeply, he actually does have a nice little niche. He's mentioned a handful of times by Homer in the Iliad and Odyssey. In Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, he visits Prometheus, now chained to a rock by Zeus, and offers the condemned god succor. One of the Orphic hymns is dedicated to him, and generally, he is either mentioned or makes brief appearances in a number of other works. As well, the Iliad features several allusions to Oceanus, not Chaos, being the first god, and thus the ultimate source of creation in Greek mythology. Together, these allusions could hardly even be called fragmentary, but what's perhaps most compelling about them is how creation conceptualized as beginning with Oceanus, as beginning with water, is consistent with the creation myths of the Near East and of ancient Egypt. The Near East, specifically ancient Mesopotamia, known today to have been a major influence to the development of Greek mythology. Alright, let's get into it. It's not uncommon to hear people say, Titans aren't gods, they're Titans. This is incorrect. Titans are gods, a specific group of gods. Just as the Olympians, the gods who live atop Mount Olympus, are a specific group of gods. The 12 Titans were the progeny of Gaia, the personification of the earth, who birthed them, and of Uranus, the personification of the sky, who sired them. Their number comprises 6 gods and 6 goddesses. The 6 male Titans, gods, were Oceanus, Coeus, Crius, Hyperion, and Iapetus, and the 6 female Titans, goddesses or Titanides, were Thea, Rhea, Themis, Mnemosyne, Phoebe, and Tethys. The Titan cohort also includes many of the children of the original 12 Titans, meaning there are second and third generation Titans as well. Though this, categorizing gods, is a seemingly arbitrary business, often more contingent on allegiance than parentage. Zeus and his 5 siblings, despite being the children of Cronus and Rhea, are not considered Titans, whereas Atlas, condemned to forever hold the sky up upon his shoulders, was the son of Iapetus and was considered a second-generation Titan, as were his siblings, Menetius, Prometheus, and Epimetheus. Anyway, it's all a bit muddled. Oceanus was the eldest of the 12 first-generation Titans, meaning he was the very first Titan. Tethys, his younger sister, was his wife, and she, depending on the version, was either a sea goddess or the personification of the font of fresh water that was the ultimate source of Oceanus's own sweet waters. Oceanus, in turn, the source of every river and rivulet, of every torrent and tributary that flowed and cascaded the world over, the very veins of the earth, the capillaries that conveyed life to the 4 corners of creation. Born to them were many children, a proliferation of progeny, the 2 of them procreating more offspring than any other divine pair in Greek mythology. Their children included the Oceanids, a group of 3,000 water nymphs, and all the rivers of the world. Unlike most of the Titans, others like Helios, the personification of the sun, also being exceptions, Oceanus was one of the material manifestations of the universe, in this respect making him more akin to the primordial deities who came before him than to the Titan cohort he was born into. Oceanus was thought to be the great river that encircled the earth, making him the terrestrial frontier, the outer limit of the earth, which, before philosopher mathematicians like Pythagoras and Parmenides, was thought to be flat and disc-shaped. Here's a passage from classical mythology A to Z that expands on this. From an elemental perspective, Oceanus was early on envisioned as a river that encircled, and thus was the outer boundary of.
Tell him I'm going to take the thing about the super soldiers out.
Okay, so that no super soldiers.
Are they waiting for a specific time to unleash their power?
Yeah, they are, because they have to do it at the moment the Antichrist is, like you read in 2 Thessalonians 2, that it's caught to echo, the restrainer is holding back the apocalypse of the Antichrist, the unveiling in his movement. So right now he's held restrained. Soon as he who restrains is removed, soon as that occurs, we have White Horse, the release of the Antichrist. Instantly, we have the release of the red. It says the whole earth. Arene, peace is taken from the whole earth, and all of a sudden, it doesn't give the details, but all of a sudden, on a global scale, people are released to begin to, and the Greek word is sphadzo, slaughter, begin to slaughter people. It's used of animal ritual butchery to begin to slaughter individuals. That's exactly how they defined it to me back in the 90s. And we've heard this again and again and again. So that scenario fits the Masonic version of Chaos Before a New Order. It fits Father Meridon from the Cathedral of the Black Goat, his book, The Devil's Bible. It fits that scenario too. So some of the oldest, darkest occultists, the idea of chaos first, a collapsing of everything so that a new order can rise, that's all by design. And we've been given the heads up in prophecy, but all prophecy has boots on the ground. It'll all, eventually happen. So I do believe that millions and millions of these trained, programmed, altered, demonized super soldiers, whether we want to say it or not, they believe they're being raised to help bring the Antichrist in.
The Antichrist.
The Antichrist.
Well, these are supposed to be the events that signal the birth of the Antichrist.
That's true in Germany when we were in Germany, when we went to Wadelsburg Castle. That's true in Poland when we went there. That's true in Switzerland. It's true in Canada. So when we talk about our research in 38 years worldwide, there may be well over 100 million generations of them. And if even half, or even if 10% were intact, like say the United States, remember the in Vegas? Look what he did. Look what that guy did. Okay, notice what would happen if 10,000 of them, or like Colorado, or like in Arizona, what if 10,000 of them were released in 1 week?